morning, everyone. Well, can I say how wonderful to be launching Tadpoles in the Torrens as a precursor to the Donald Graves address, because it celebrates imaginative, creative writing, and that's what I'd like to concentrate on today. I want to just make a few acknowledgements. I feel enormously humbled and privileged to be making this address today. There are lots of mentors along the way, including, of course, the previous Donald Graves speakers, Mem Fox, Teresa Kremen, Ralph Fletcher and Lisa Curvin. I also want to acknowledge the impact that my work with Sydney Theatre Company has had, and Jackie Manuel and David Smith, in terms of the work that we've done looking at Sydney Story Factory's creative writing. And finally, Amy Mortimer, a PhD student of mine who's just finishing her PhD, who has particularly focused on creative writing or imaginative writing. I'd also like to honour Professor Paul Brock AM, who just a few weeks before he died earlier this year offered to talk with me about his time with Donald Graves when he was a visiting scholar in the US. Paul, I think, was an inspiration to many of us in his work, both in English, in education, in policy, and the work that he did in teacher standards across Australia. I'm going to start by reading you just a little bit of a story from Parker Palmer's work on teaching with heart and soul. And it's interesting, I think, because this was written in 2005, but it really resonates for me in 2016. Public education is a political battlefield on which both teachers and children are at risk, especially children, the children who live on the margins of our society. As I try to understand how teachers can protect their own integrity amid these dangers so that they can help protect the integrity of children and of education itself, I return time and again to the memoirs of a man who grew up in Harlem during the 1920s and 30s. He writes about the hardships of being a child in that time and place, about the poverty and despair that surrounded his young life, about the price that he and his community paid for the racism of American society. But he also writes about the sources of light that illumined his future in the midst of what he calls dark times. Public school teachers are at the top of his list, most notably the never-to-be-forgotten Mr. Porter, my black maths teacher, who soon gave up any attempt to teach me math. I had been born apparently with some kind of deformity that resulted in a total inability to count. From arithmetic to geometry, I never passed a single test. Porter took his failure very well and compensated for it by helping me run the school magazine. He assigned me a story to write about Harlem for this magazine, a story that he insisted demanded serious research. Porter took me downtown to the main branch of the public library and waited for me while I began my research. And I was thinking about how Barbara Comer's keynote yesterday talked a lot about this kind of practice in the classroom. He was very proud of the story I eventually turned in. But I was so terrified that afternoon that I vomited all over his shoes in the subway. The teachers I am talking about accepted my limits. I could begin to accept them without shame when they suggested other possibilities open to me. I was shy, withdrawn, and an uneasy student, yet my teachers somehow made me believe that I could learn. And when I could scarcely see for myself any future at all, my teachers told me that the future was mine. That young man was James Baldwin, who went on, of course, to become a very great writer. And I think that it's really important that we acknowledge the work of our teachers, because I get blown away sometimes in the classrooms that I'm fortunate to be part of by what so many of our teachers, so many of you who are here, are doing in the face of constant negative, if you like, blame and shame about teachers. You know, we seem often to be the ones in the firing line, and teacher educators as well. So I wanted to start with that, and I guess say that in some ways I feel that I'm talking to the converted by the fact that you're here today, and I hope that there will be something in this for you that is helpful. So, I'm just going to talk about a small part of Donald Graves' work. I'm going to start by focusing on the emphasis that he places on the importance of teachers as writers, and his emphasis on the fact that writing can be for us as well. It can be for the individual, as well, of course, as communicating something to other people. Oh, I keep going backwards. In some senses, I am going backwards. Back to Donald Graves. He also talked about some principles that I think are really important in thinking about our writing as teachers, and also the writing of the children that we work with, or the young people, or the university students. He talks about how important it is to provide adequate provision of time. That sounds really simple, but most primary teachers will tell you that they don't have enough time. The increasing additional things added to their day, the increasing expectations in different areas, is also reflected, I think, in the increasing number of dot points added to the teacher professional standards. And in pre-service teacher education, I have to admit that the same thing is there for us. I would suggest to you that in the time that I've been in teacher education, we have felt that time for things like creative writing has been crowded out by other expectations. And perhaps we need to do a bit of rethinking about what is our priority in the face of everyone else crowding what we're supposed to do in our curriculum. Secondly, the individual child's choice of writing topic, or our choice of writing topic. Now, I don't for 1 minute suggest that there aren't times when the teacher will suggest a particular focus, a particular unit, a particular writing associated with that. And I also acknowledge completely that children need to have an understanding of the different purposes that they might write for. But at the same time, it's important, I think, to go back to Graves' suggestion that We all need opportunities to make our own choices at times. Thirdly, responding to meaning first. To meaning first, if we're providing feedback. And that's not to say that the grammar and the punctuation and the spelling aren't important, but it is to say that the meaning is most important. And finally, the establishment of a community of writers. And it was wonderful to attend Renee and Joe's presentation yesterday about the community of writers that they have established so richly at Turner School. Oh, here I go again, sorry. So I want to start this reflection by asking you if you consider yourself a writer. And certainly a couple of years ago, Teresa Kremen asked you to think about that as well. And perhaps we're asking you because we have a kind of intuition that some of you won't consider yourself as a writer. But if you do, what kind of writer are you? Are you a motivated one? Do you enjoy writing for you or for others? Are you a successful writer? A versatile one? Or do you consider you're more a functional kind of writer? You're okay in writing for a particular kind of purpose with particular kinds of constraints. The last one is what I want to focus on today. Do you consider yourself a creative, imaginative writer? Now, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm not going to ask for hands. I can't see any hands anyway. But I would like you to think about that, because certainly one of the things in my reading of Donald Graves' work is his emphasis on how important it is for teachers to understand the writing process and to see themselves as writing and to write. It doesn't have to be huge slabs of writing, nevertheless, to write. Sorry. Now, the other question that I want you to think about, reflect on, and maybe not now, maybe at another time, is how did you learn to write? If you are a writer, if you see yourself as a writer, how did you learn to write? Sometimes we cast back to a golden age in literacy and education and pretend that everything was rosy. But I have to tell you that when I went to school in the 60s, I don't remember anyone teaching me to write. We had traditional grammar, we had spelling, and we had composition. But nobody gave me, that I can remember, in those early years, much scaffolding around how to write. And one day in Year 5, I got a really good mark in my composition. I started it with ominous black clouds loomed in the sky and the night was dark and listless. Sorry if you've heard this story before, but it's true. I didn't even know what ominous meant, to be honest, but I got a good mark for that composition, and I got a tick next to that sentence. So guess what? Every year, when I had to do a composition, luckily I didn't have the same teacher, I started like that. And I certainly am sharing all of this with you because I'm not sure I consider myself a successful writer in a creative and imaginative sense. I love having a go at poetry, etc. And I have a dream that one day I won't have to write academic papers. I might be able to go to a creative writing workshop and really write for me. Maybe that shouldn't be a dream. Maybe that should be happening sooner rather than later. Is it an area that you think you need to work on? I'm not going to get this right till the end of this, I can see that. Okay. I want to not define creativity because that would take the whole of this address. And there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done on thinking about what it actually means in the primary classroom. What does it actually look like? I am going to just share with you quickly the list that David Smith and Jackie Manuel decided they would use as indicators of creativity when they were looking at the creative writing at Sydney Story Factory. Very similar to other lists of creative indicators, but they thought these were the ones most commonly reflected in the literature. And I want to go right back to Vygotsky because he wrote a wonderful book on imagination, which I've only recently had read the whole lot of. He talks about how play is the initial expression of imagination, followed by drawing and storytelling. I thought that was also really interesting when we're trying to get a handle on what we mean by imaginative or creative writing. And certainly that play, and play with words, both orally and written, and listening to how words are read, etc., and playing with a dramatic play, which I'll come to later, are all really important. And I just wanted to sort of, in passing, note the importance he places on drawing. Because I guess along the way, some of us leave drawing behind, despite the fact, as young children, we all love to draw. And perhaps we don't give drawing enough time either in terms of drawing stories, drawing what's happening as well. This also is a quote from that work of Vygotsky. If you like, you can see shades of Ken Robinson there, who talked about creativity as being as important for us as human beings as literacy and numeracy. The basis of all aspects of cultural life, artistic, scientific, and technical creation. This is what my grandson Timothy defined as imagination when I asked him. When you think of stuff that's actually not actually real. I thought it was interesting that he talked a bit about his process. I think of things I know, and then I make up other things like them. I like writing stories. Donald Graves told us children like to write. Yet, to be totally honest with you, I'm very disappointed at the way a lot of writing pedagogy has become framed in a very narrow way or packaged in a set of steps or driven by a particular text? How much imagination and creativity can go into your writing in a 40-minute test? I'm not saying that that test won't show us some things, but I am saying that there needs to be other kinds of assessment alongside that is equally valued as important. And as Donald Murray said, again, way back in 1990, too often we only talk about writing as a set of skills, an act of testing. But in actual fact, writing is much more than that. It is a different way of knowing. Creative writing, writing imaginatively, can be an act of healing, an act of helping us make decisions, a way of coming to terms with something that's happening. What Donald Murray is actually saying is that that kind of writing is a necessary process for us, that we mustn't leave it behind in childhood. If children love to write, what happens as they get older? If we love to write as children, what happened if we don't now? And some of the research suggests that too often we identify much more with reading than with writing, and that perhaps writing has become devalued. Now, I don't want to say any of these things definitively, because I really would like you to reflect on them and think about whether there's any truth in them in your own experience of what's happening. And if there is truth, what should our action be as educators? Should we try to do something to stop what's happening in terms of this more reductive view of what writing is? Here's just a couple of quotes. Writing motivates you to look closely at life. Catherine Paterson, in her wonderful book on writing, A Sense of Wonder, talks about a writer as a treasure hunter, actually looking through what she calls the trash to find the hidden treasures that are there. So I guess what I really want to focus on is thinking about the need to perhaps conceptualise creative writing as a literary art form. We have a very siloed national curriculum that doesn't put literature and creative writing in its arts intended curriculum. But we know as primary teachers that we must authentically integrate across the primary curriculum. And by authentically, I mean meaningfully, not for the sake of integrating. And I think Barbara showed us some wonderful ways that could happen yesterday. There is literature around that talks about writing creatively as helping us develop a collaborative process and work truly cooperatively with others. Now, that's a generalisation. There are some who would far prefer to write in isolation. But on the whole, there is that suggestion that having the opportunity to just explore through writing, so transcending, if you like, what we often think about as creative or imaginative, not only narrative, not only descriptive writing, Just exploring with words, playing with words, improves our capacity to tolerate ambiguity and take risks, and helps us to problem solve, helps us to push boundaries, also helps us to learn from our failures and to build resilience. And a really powerful TED Talk for me has been Marcus Zuzak's discussion of his failures. So here he is, the author of The Book Thief, been on the bestseller list in New York for more than a decade. And in the TED Talk, he talks more about his failures and what he learned from his failures in terms of the times that he describes as successes. And I guess that kind of ability to learn from our failures, to take the risks, is what helps build our resilience and self-efficacy. The kinds of things that we've been told are life skills or dispositions or habits of mind that we need to have and that our children need to have. Brené Brown also talks about the power of vulnerability. Writers who share their work are putting themselves out there. But what Brené Brown says is that it's actually our most accurate measurement of courage to actually put ourselves out there, to put our writing out there. Brian Camborne, in 1988, and again in the book that Jan Turnbull, Georgina Barton and Cynthia Brock edited last year on teaching writing in today's classrooms, talks about the knowledge base we have about success in writing. They're all things that you will know well. This is a little example, again from Timmy's work. This is his drawing of Jack and the Beanstalk after reading that story, that fairy tale. And now Timmy has moved on to school and he's in year 1 and is learning to read. He does most of his creative writing at home. And that really saddens me because he's already learning perhaps that there isn't a place for it in the formal context of the school. Recently, I gave him the 27th annual hippopotamus race to read, and I gave his brothers a picture book. And he said, "Well, thanks very much, Nanny, but I actually don't think I'm a good enough reader to read a novel yet. You know, I'd really have preferred that you gave me a picture book." So I said, "Okay, well, have a look at this book. It does have drawings on every page, and I think you'll enjoy it." So when I went the next week, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but he had started a book about a hippopotamus family. And you'll see that he's listed the characters there at the beginning. And then he's got "Let's begin," "Turn this page," "Hooray." So there's all that anticipation, you know, of what he's going to be sharing with you as a writer. And here's the first chapter. Now, over the next few weeks, the hippopotamus family story grew and grew and grew. You can see the staples, you know, he had to keep adding paper. Till finally, his dad helped him edit it, he word processed it, and he gave copies, printed it out, gave copies to all of his audience who read it with enthusiasm and then had discussions with him about his story. That's I think, a really good example of that wanting to write, that wanting to share that Donald Graves talks about at age 6. And I really hope that he continues to enjoy that kind of process. I want to suggest to you that for some children, reading a quality literary text is a very good way in. Looking at what expert authors can do, how they have played with words, woven their words, created their characters, can be a jumping off point. I also want to suggest in a few minutes that other arts-based, quality arts-based learning experiences can also be an important way in for those children who need, to have a whole lot of different understandings, different perspectives, different ways of making meaning shared with them, rather than thinking about writing at the end of a process or a linear step-by-step process, but a kind of recurrent opportunity to immerse in a whole range of different experiences can be very successful. And I wanted to share briefly with you the experience I had just recently in looking at the rules of summer with a Year 5 class. And I have written about it in detail in the chapter with Jackie Manuel and Amy Mortimer, so I'm only going to talk about it very briefly. But I was asked to come and work with that Year 5 class because they just finished NAPLAN. And the teacher was really concerned that they had lost their confidence to write in their own way, to use their own ideas, to think about their own writing style. She wanted me to give them permission to write for themselves. And one of my concerns echoed hers, because in those first couple of weeks, and I was only going once a week for a morning, a couple of hours between first thing and recess. What I asked them to do was, we looked at some of the beautiful artwork in Rules of Summer, and we looked at the rules that had been created, those captions that Sean Tan had created around those amazing pieces of art. And I asked them about rules. I asked them about the rules that they invented for themselves. I asked them to think about whether they'd like to play with rules, and that's what we did. But initially, what we got back were the school rules, the rules of life, the rules at home that they'd been taught. We got lots of really, moral and ethical comments, but we didn't get any play. It was only when we started to actually try and embody some of the things that were happening and invent our own scenarios for some of these things, because you really have to make up the stories for these. Every page, if you like, is a different story. It's only when they started to relax into that through some use of drama strategies that they started to just relax a little bit. But interestingly, one of the most significant turning points in that was that a Year 6 teacher did the writing and the drama with us over that period of time. And when he was prepared to share the story he'd written, to share the rule he'd created then from his story, you could almost visibly see the children relax. You could almost visibly see them feeling that their ideas were good enough. They mightn't yet be perfect. They might need some more work, but they were good enough to share. And that there wasn't a formula that they needed to work within. And I think that's one of the things that are really important for us to find a way of establishing in our classrooms, alongside the other need to write for different purposes, etc. Ben Fox says that a writer must ache with caring. And I love this quote. When you're writing under the influence of love, there's a power that will weave your words into magic. So my question is, in your lifetime, has there been a time when you ached with caring? When you fell in love with something, an idea, a concept, a way of being, a particular beautiful painting, artefact, a person, whatever, that you needed to examine it so closely that you ached with care and you needed to write about it. If we are going to find times when children will find that moment when they ache with care, and it won't be every day, but if we are going to give them the opportunities to find those moments, then we must give them opportunities like the teachers in Barbara's keynote yesterday, to feel, to look and listen, to explore the world, to find the treasures in the trash. Time to read quality literature. Not readers with contrived text. Quality literature. Experts at work. Time to think. Time to talk. Time to embody. Time to write. We have to be courageous to do that as educators, because we have all the other pressures bearing down on us. We have to take that step to slow down what we're doing so that we can have time to examine, think, talk, story, enact, embody, and write. And it's that important love of storytelling, as Brian Camborne tells us again, that is really important to embed in our students' lives. Some students will not come to school having had the opportunity to tell stories, made up stories, fantasy to explore. Some children will come to school without having had the opportunity to read any literary texts. So if that's the case, then story is going to be, and storying and storytelling is going to be a really important place to start. I wanted to recommend to you, I'm now not going to have time to read it at all, but Rebecca Solnit's book, The Far Away Nearby, is a story that I think you might get a lot of treasures out of. She's a wonderful writer and she tells some really beautiful stories. And as usual, I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to you'll just have to take that as a recommendation. The other thing I wanted to say very quickly, and I know some of you will have read The Artist's Way, but I didn't read it till last year. And Julia Cameron suggests that we need to write every day. And she calls them morning pages. She says that we need to write about 3 pages, not sort of worrying what we're writing, just writing. Now, I was going great guns when I was on holidays last September for a week. I did write every day. I didn't write 3 pages, but I did write every day. And it was really interesting how it gave me a very a sense that I was clarifying a lot of the things that I was obviously unconsciously thinking about or worried about. And, it helped me organise my thoughts for the day. She says, don't read them for the first few months, just write, just have a go. She talks about in her book, The Artist's Way, which has been in print for an awful long time now, about her experience in her workshops, using this as one strategy. There are lots of other strategies, but how it does help people recover their sense of identity, power, etc. So I'm throwing that in because it's something that I've tried to do as someone like you with so much on their plate, ever-increasing demands, ever-increasing expectations. But it is something, and I haven't ever got back to writing every day, every week, but I have started, writing at least something, and it has made a big difference. The last thing I want to add today won't surprise you if you know the work that I've done the whole of my career, and that's really about the use of educational or process drama with quality literature. Vygotsky, way back in 2004, talks about how important it is, and because it is linked to play, because it is linked to enactment and embodiment, it can be very important for sustaining children's creativity. We're all born with that sense of curiosity, that sense of wonder, that creative impulse. The opportunity to enact, embody, not for performance, but for exploration, for play, for walking in somebody else's shoes, is one of the most profound ways that we can make sure that creativity stays very much a part of who we are and what we do. And not only is the research unequivocal about the importance of not just drama, the importance of quality arts experiences, the neuroscience is catching up, if you like, by talking about how important it is for us to move from enactment and embodiment to the drawing, to the visual representation, and thence to the written. And so I think, again, it's about slowing down those times for writing, taking the time to do these things, not again always in a sequence, but to make those part of what's happening in your literacy classroom. They don't have to be separate. They just have to be fragments that are embedded authentically where it is really going to help children get into the deep meaning of things and explore dilemmas and understandings in a real way, because they'll get a chance to try things out for themselves. I guess to conclude, there's, a lot of things that you already know about. I guess my biggest message is we must give young children, right from the beginning of their preschool or early childhood care context through the primary years, on to secondary and into tertiary, that opportunity to create. We must not let all of the other things crowd out those important parts of of what the research tells us very clearly. I would say core, but I hate to use that word core because it has other connotations, I know. Amy's work is what I want to finish with. As I said, she's just finishing her PhD. She's just doing the final corrections, having got her examiner's reports back. She spent time at Sydney Story Factory because as a primary teacher she felt that the creativity had been squeezed out of her everyday work at school. And she was, if you like, devastated at how little research there was about creative and imaginative writing within primary education. There's a lot of research in tertiary, in those creative writing courses, etc., that talk about identity, resilience, collaboration, etc. But in primary education, there isn't very much at all. And yet, at the same time, there's an increasing amount of use of the words creative learning, creative pedagogy, creativity, etc., etc. But alongside that rhetoric, there's not a lot about what it looks like, not ways for teachers to action this. And that's what she is passionate about doing. She's the creative learning person at her school at the moment, which has also been an interesting journey. And I'm sure some published writing will come out of all of this. She also demonstrates that a lot of the creative teaching strategies are not new. A lot of them have been around for a long time, and if you've been in teaching as long as I have, they've been there since I first did my degree in the 70s. But they've kind of been overlain by all sorts of other demands and expectations. And there's also been some other really important learning for us to take on board as well. What she's suggesting is that perhaps some of these need to re-emerge. It's sad that that ABC program suggested that what was happening in that school was revolutionary. I think what was happening for those children around reading and writing was fantastic. But that stuff isn't revolutionary. That stuff is things that they're things that we know and lots of us practice every day. But we're not getting that message out to our policymakers and bureaucrats and politicians. So if we truly believe those things, we have to find a voice. So, if you like, if creativity is about originality, imagination, expressiveness, risk-taking, let's think about creative writing as a way for that to happen. Let's find a way not only to limit our writing lessons to particular writing conventions, to particular kinds of writing, and I'm not saying they're not important, but let's find a way to make room for that time to write creatively, time to value our children's wonderful imaginations. Now, I mentioned Sydney Story Factory, but there are lots of other wonderful organisations that are sadly sometimes working outside of schools, happily often working with teachers in professional learning to help us make sure that we keep creativity front and centre, and there are just a few there. I love this quote from Foucault. I think that we as teachers need to think about how we can use writing ourselves to think differently about things, and if we do that, we will be able to be the best mentors for our students, because we'll be in the process too, and that's what's so important. Thank you.
Thank you to Robyn for a stimulating and challenging address. I'm sure, Robyn, that many of the messages that you gave resonated with the audience, and especially for me, it resonated about integrity. Integrity of children, integrity of teachers, and integrity of education. And I also really thought about your challenge about where does writing fit within the broader literacy debates and the work that we're doing. And I think that that's something that we need to reflect on as an organisation. Thank you, finally, for revisiting Professor Graves' writing and messages and drawing conclusions to contemporary writing practices and pedagogy. Ladies and gentlemen, join with me in thanking Robyn.